So the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about true fear. We've been talking about the fear of failure and the fear of missing out. So it's cool to talk about fears and how they come about, how they manifest. We know that they come in many different shapes and sizes. Some of them are very what we would call like weak, small fears. Some of them are really big fears. They come from different locations. They come from different experiences. They can be projected onto you by someone else, or you can experience them on your own. Something happens to you and they come about. But they affect different people in different ways. Some people are better at overcoming certain fears than others. Two people may be afraid of sharks, for example. One person will never get in the ocean. The other person may put their toes in. Both of them have the same fear, but it just affects people differently. Tonight we're going to talk about facing our fears. They come in different shapes and sizes. We've already gone through that. Let me give you some truths surrounding fear. This is kind of going to guide our thoughts tonight. So, truth number one, fear is real. If anybody tells you that it's not a real fear, they're not using that term correctly and they're not understanding what fears actually are. Fears are real things. They're real responses that our bodies have to the world around us. And in fact, they're supposed to be there. We'll get into that a little bit here in just a second. We also want to put another truth out there that God is greater than our fears. There's no fear that we will come across that God is not infinitely greater than. And finally, in order for us to overcome our fears, we have to trust God more. Those are three truths that we're going to dive into tonight. So we'll go ahead and jump into the very first one. That fear is real. Fear is real because fear is a natural defense that our bodies have that protect us from danger. If you have ever seen an animal with sharp teeth and you paused before going up to that animal, like that's an innate fear that you have. It may not be like, ooh, like you're shaking in your shoes, but it may be that you're cautious. That cautiousness is designed to protect you. When you walk close to the edge of something and you're getting close to the edge of it, like you begin to be very careful about your movements. You don't want to fall off. I mean, imagine standing on the edge of a building that's like, 50, 60 feet up. Like you look over the edge of that building, you don't want to like look too far because your body weight carries you and then there you go. Like it's okay to have a fear to not get too close to the edge because you don't want to fall over. That's a good thing to have. That's something that's natural inside of us that we all have, we all possess. And also the severity of these responses to fear depend on the level with which we're afraid. In other words, how scared you are will determine how you react. Y'all have heard of the fight or flight mentality, right? Yeah. Like you get into a situation, you either take off running away from the situation or you stand your ground and you fight it. Different people have different points at which they reach the I'm going to stand and fight. Some people reach the point where instead of the flight option, they do the fight option, but they play dead. We call that the possum maneuver, and it works great sometimes. Other times you just get mauled like the rest of them. It doesn't work with all bears. I've never had to use that method with bears, but I've heard that bears just grab you and flop you around anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I could really start doing animals now, and yeah. But it depends on the severity of the fear. Some of us, when we see the cops as we're riding down the highway, you're driving and a cop pulls in behind you. Some people get into the fear mode like your hands are at 10 and 2 or 9 and 3, like you're not going to let go. You're making sure you use your blinker. Both hands are on the steering wheel the whole time. No one in the car is speaking. The radio's turned down because somehow that makes you a better driver. Like you can see better with the radio turned down. I don't know how that works. But you're all up in arms because you don't want to get stopped. That's a fear. Your body is naturally reacting to that, by the way. Like we do that. That's something that our bodies do. And it's natural for us to experience that. But some of us, like myself, I don't really typically get that way about a cop if he's behind me, especially if I've not been speeding. Now, if I've been speeding, all bets are off. But if I haven't been speeding, if I know that I'm obeying the law, I do not care that there's a cop behind me. I have friends of mine, though, that like begin to sweat when the cops get behind them because it's like they're nervous. They're going to get stopped and it's going to be bad. They're going to get a ticket for the 27th time because they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. The truth to remember here is that we don't need to minimize the fears of others and we don't need to minimize the fears in ourselves. It's okay to be afraid. We do have a real enemy here. Like I want to bring in the spiritual aspect of this because what we need to realize is that there is someone out there that we should fear. Now that fear shouldn't paralyze us, but we do have an enemy out there who is seeking to destroy us, and we need to be aware of him. We need to be aware of that. So I got a verse here for you. Be sober-minded, be of sober spirit, be on alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Now, does this sound, is found in 1 Peter 5:8. Does this enemy, adversary, sound like someone who is coming to bring you flowers? No, that is not what this adversary is doing. This adversary, the devil, is coming to seek to destroy you. Now, if you're a child of God, like your soul is already bound with Christ in heaven, that can't be taken away from you. But he can do everything that he possibly can to destroy your witness, to prevent you from being able to share with others, to make you so paralyzed with fear that you don't do anything for God. And thus he's destroyed your witness. He's destroyed your opportunity to help other people. He may weasel his way into destroying your family. I've known many of families, couples, husbands and wives that have had older children that are gone wayward. They are not following Christ with their lives. And what's happening is, ultimately, Satan is after them. And he's using their children to get there. Because if the parents are constantly worried about their children, they're not focused on the mission that God's placed them on. At some point in a parent's life, we all have to make the decision. We all have to come to the realization we cannot make anyone, even our own kids, love Christ. They have to choose for themselves to love Christ. That's not an easy pill to swallow. And right now, I'm speaking on this side of that because my oldest child is 11. I hope that it never happens, but if it does, I hope that I have the mentality that, God, you're ultimately in control here. And I don't have to fear that. I can trust in you. Because the enemy is real. He's seeking to destroy us, and he will do whatever it takes to destroy us. So fear is okay. It's what you do with it that matters. Next thing we're going to hit up is God is greater than all of our fears. Now this seems like a duh statement, but let's realistically think about who God is. Who is the creator of everything? God. Who holds all things together? God. If you read through the Psalms, you'll see specifically Psalm 8. I read it last night when we had our Facebook thing for our church. And Psalm 8 talks about how amazing creation is. And yet in the midst of all of the beauty and just mind-blowing creation that God has placed us in, God placed man at the top of it to be His servants over all creation. Like, who is man that God, you created all this, that you would think of us? Like, that was David's idea in that psalm. And for us, we need to realize that the God who created it all is the God who's in control. Because of who God is as creator and sustainer of the universe, there's nothing in this whole universe that He's not aware of, nor is He afraid of it. Now think about that. Is there anything that God's scared of? No, there's not. He has no fear. Fear comes from not being able to handle something, like not being able to handle a situation or not being able to handle this opposition coming at you. God has no fear because there is no equal to Him. God is not at the top of this mountain where all these other gods are fighting out to see who's the best. God is at the top and everything else is far below Him. Like, there's no chance, no opposition that could even come close to Him compared to Him. He is God and they are not. All things are under God's control, and God works out all of those things for His glory. So that, and this comes out of Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love God and to those who are called according to His purposes. Romans 8:28. I'm going to throw it up here for you again. We know God causes all things. Is that some, or does that leave any of them out? No, it's all things. Everything that happens in our world happens for good to those who love God. We may not understand how, our best friend passing in a car accident is good for us, good for them, good for their family. We may never on this side of eternity understand what's going on there. We may never understand on this side of eternity how God could use the divorce of our parents for His good and for our good and for His glory. Like, that doesn't compute in our finite minds. We don't understand that. But the Scriptures clearly tell us that, one, since God is a creator and in control of all things, He's working all things towards His end, and it's for our good. And if the Bible tells us that's what's happening, we have to trust it. If we're going to be people who follow the Bible, follow God's Word faithfully, we have to trust it. We have to trust that He is going to do this, and that we can believe Him. We can trust Him. And that's going to lead us into our last one. Before we get there, this is a truth to remember. There's nothing outside the ability of our God to handle. He will always be greater. Like, think about the worst natural disaster on the planet. Did it catch God by surprise? No. Can it be used for His glory? Yes. Is it going to ultimately be for the good of His people? Yes. We may not ever understand how. And that's where this gets tricky. Because from our vantage point, a parent passing away, a friend, deserting us, getting in a car accident, those things, getting cancer, those things are outside of our control. Like, they don't seem like good things at the time. But God doesn't ask us to understand. He asks us to trust Him. And that's what we need to do, because He is greater. The way that we overcome these fears, though, is by trusting Him more. If fear is real and God is greater than anything, we can live without fear because God has that situation under control. What do we have to worry about if God is in control? If we trust God and He's in control, what is there for us to worry about? Nothing. Like the God who has the ability to do all things, if He chooses to, He can heal you on this side of eternity. Like, we have miraculous tales of people that should be dead, who are now living. God miraculously healed their bodies. We've had people that have gone in for a cancer scan and they were completely covered with cancer in their bodies. The doctor said, there's no way you're going to survive. And God's people prayed, and God answered that prayer on this side of eternity, and they were healed on this side. And the doctors are left with, I have no idea how it happened. That's God. If that's not catching Him by surprise, and that's not hurting Him, like, we need to trust Him in this. He's got it. Who better to help you in a situation than the God who allowed you to go into that situation? The God who created you. Who better to know what's going on in your body than the God who created you? He fashioned you. Read Psalm 139. Knit me together in my mother's womb. Like, there's some deliberate, intentional actions that God is taking in that moment of our creation, of our coming together as a human being. If He's the one involved in that, what do we have to worry about? Do we still worry? Yeah. Are we still afraid? Yeah, we are. It's because we're not seeing things from His perspective. Psalm 27, I'll read this to you. This is verses 1 through 3. A psalm of David. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evildoers come upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumble and fell. Though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war rise against me, I shall be confident. If God is there, if God is present, I mean, as the psalmist just said, like, no matter what comes against me, I will not fear because you are there, God. You are there with me. If God is real and He's greater than anything we have, what do we have to worry about? Y'all, this is where the rubber meets the road for you and I. I've already said that in order to overcome our fears, we've got to trust God more. Now, this is where the practical application of what we're talking about, this whole series on fear, comes to. As our view of God increases, our view of the circumstances around us will decrease. What I mean is that as we start to see God for who He really is, then the things that are going on around us that are overwhelming us will begin to start looking a lot smaller. Like, I'm from South Georgia and North Florida, and we have little tiny hills. And for me, growing up, those little tiny hills, that's a big hill. And then I moved to Knoxville. And these are some big hills. In 2017, I flew over some really big hills. I flew over the Rockies. Like, those little hills in Georgia, really small when you stand next to the Rocky Mountains. When you stand next to even House Mountain. Like, it shows just comparison-wise just how much greater God is. The closer you get to God, the bigger He's going to be in your worldview. And the less this world is going to be able to tell you that you need to be afraid of something. The less the world is going to overcome you and overwhelm you. And we do this by growing our relationship with God. The way we do that is prayer, Bible reading, and fellowship with other believers. Like the go-to Baptist verse for never missing church is found in Hebrews, it's chapter 10. It's like, do not forsake the assembling of the body, or something to that effect. Depending on what translation you read, it's going to be something along those lines. Don't forsake gathering together with God's people. Now, I make light of that statement because it's been so widely misused and used to browbeat people into coming to a building. What it's really about is gathering together with God's people who are truly God's people and being the church. That's what it's about. So we grow closer with God when we are praying to Him, spending intimate time with Him. Sometimes prayer is talking to Him. Sometimes prayer is being talked to from Him. Just sitting and listening. Sometimes it's audible words you hear. Sometimes it's just impressions on your soul, on your heart that you get. Like, okay, God, I understand. A lot of times we read this and it opens up our eyes to what He's trying to tell us. I can't tell you the number of times that I've read a passage and been like, that's a pretty neat passage. And then like the next Sunday, the pastor will preach on it. I'm like, okay, God, I got you. I understand. I mean, like, I was super giddy like 3 or 4 weeks ago when Pastor Dave spoke on John 8, when he's talking about the woman who was caught in adultery. Like, in my head, I'm like, I just talked about that. And what it confirmed with me was that I'm doing the right thing. I'm on the right path. Because if I'm teaching you about this and He's teaching you about it, there's something in there that God wants you, His people, to know about and to understand about who He is and about who you are in Him. And so the more that we spend time with God, the easier those times will come. And we'll begin to grow through those. Now, the reciprocal, the opposite of this, is also true. As our view of God diminishes, our view of our circumstances goes up. It increases. And then we become overwhelmed by our circumstances. Like, if you're in a battle, and I think of all these battle scenes from all these awesome epic movies like Lord of the Rings, I think of it Lord of the Rings. And like, you see people encircled, like there's no one around them. Like the enemy has completely circled them. And they're like closing in on them, and you're like afraid that person's going to die. And then all of a sudden the camera shoots to a whole army heading your way, like to save the day. Like, if you focus on the people that are right next to you, like the enemy that's circling you around, then you won't see salvation is coming outside. That a bigger army, a greater army is coming. The biblical model of this was found in 2 Kings chapter 6. Elijah is standing, I guess it would have been Shah at that point, is sitting at a place called Dothan. Not in Alabama, but Dothan. and he is standing on top of he's actually inside of like the citadel there in the city. And this army of Arameans has come to like wipe out him, because he is telling the Israelite people what the king of Aramea is trying to do to take over Israel. God is telling the prophet what the other enemy king is doing, and now that Elijah is telling the king to not go that route and protect yourself. Well, now he's just going to come and kill Elijah and be done with it. His army encircles the city, and they begin to make preparations to siege the city. And the servant of the prophet goes to the rooftop, and he looks out and he sees this vast army right in front of him, and he's freaking out. He's like, Master, what are we going to do? Like, the army is encamped against us. We're going to die. And Elijah makes this comment, 2 Kings 6:16, or 16:6. It says, do not fear, for those who are with us are greater than those who are with them. And then he said a prayer, and he asked God to open the eyes of his servant so his servant could see. And when God opened the eyes of the servant, what the servant saw with his eyes was his circumstances that were right in front of him. What his servant was now able to see was God's army had completely covered the hills. So imagine standing on the top of this building, and there's an army just in the grass area around here. But if you look on the mountainside all the way around us in a 360-degree view, there's another army to protect us. That's there, coming to fight our battle for us. There. The circumstances are now a lot smaller because the one who is saving us is that much greater. That's what's going on here. If you increase your view of God by spending time with Him, then your view of your circumstances will drop. And you will become less overwhelmed, and you'll be able to face your fear. If you focus on that fear and you don't draw close to God, and you pull away from God, and you pull away from His church, and you pull away from spending time with Him, one, you've got no ammo for the fight, and two, you're only going to see the circumstances around you, and you're going to be paralyzed and unable to fight. What do we do now? Well, pretty simple. Because of who God is as creator and sustainer of the universe, we need to realize that there's nothing in this universe that He's not aware of, nor is there anything in this universe that He's afraid of. So if God's not scared of it, and He's on our side, we don't have to fear it. And if fear is real and God is greater than anything, we can live without fear because God has our situation under His control. He's not going to leave us or forsake us in that. Ultimately, you put your trust in God by spending more time with Him and His church. Again, I stress not the building, the people in the building. Growth is going to happen. If you're spending time with God daily and moment by moment growing with Him, you're going to have more peace with Him. You'll have peace in your life, and it'll be a peace that doesn't make sense. You're going to have patience with others that you normally wouldn't have patience with. Yeah, even those people in your own home that you want to strangle sometimes or beat with a sock or something, I don't know. Whatever you want to do to that person, God will give you more patience with them. You'll have more love for them because you will have been with the author of love. And it's going to pour out on you. And you're going to have more contentment with the things that are going on in life. These are the byproducts of a closer walk with God. The last one I think might be the most important. Your witness is now going to grow. Your ability to share Christ's love with the world around you is going to become stronger because you've drawn close to God. When the world's fearing everything going on around you, you can say, I don't have to fear because God's got it. I don't have to be afraid. God's got it. Now, I want to give you this question, and we're going to take some time here in just a few minutes to go over this question individually. What do you need to do in your own life to overcome your fears? Thinking back over that list that I gave you of things that you can do, what are some things you can do in your own life to overcome your fears? Do you need to begin reading your Bible more? Do you need to begin a daily time of prayer and preparation and maybe even journaling? Like, I'm not a journaler, but there was a season of my life that I needed it. It was around the time that my father-in-law passed away. And like, I needed that to get my heart out there. I don't have a problem talking, as you can tell, but sometimes I have a problem sharing exactly what's going on inside. And so sometimes you need to write it on a piece of paper. Sometimes you need to put it down somewhere and just write. And so if that's the case, get a pen and a pad and start writing. Or put it in your notes app on your phone, or type it on a computer, wherever you need to do it. Keep track. Get your thoughts out there. Pour out your prayers to God. I mean, if you've read through the Psalms at all, several of these Psalms are David like, God, I don't know what to do. I need your help. But I'm going to rest knowing that you're going to help me. Like there are several Psalms that everything's hitting the fan and Dave's like, God, I don't know how it's going to happen, but you got it. I want us all to get to that point. And the only way we're going to get there is if we spend time with God. So what do you need to do? Specific task do you need to do in your own life to make that happen?